any questions from the audience? If anybody has something they want to ask any of us?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you have this perspective, and I think I see a lot of right things about it. On the flip side, you also have this tiger mom concept. So that all these, I don't know, people are familiar with this, but this mother, Amy Chua, I think her name is, who writes about how sort of our culture is so focused on the kid being happy and not so much on achievement, and then she's an East Asian woman, and her thesis is that
Asian American immigrant. I mean, she's an immigrant.
Right. So Asian American immigrant, and actually part of her thesis is that immigrants of certain types of groups have this drive towards achievement. So how do you sort of reconcile those two elements of us being focused on achievement, but really?
Did you have a degree, wouldn't you think? I mean, because
Sorry. Is your point that that she's arguing that we're too focused on achievement, we should be more focused on happiness?
No, she's arguing the opposite, that American children are focused on it.
We're too focused on letting our children have fun, and then she's got...
Right, and so American kids just can't achieve as well as children of immigrant parents, for example, because immigrant parents are focused on.
No, should I start?
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, you can tell I get worked up. I got a little worked up about it. I think it's kind of negative, actually. I don't think we have a problem of parents in affluent communities and middle class communities not being focused enough on achievement. I mean, I think they're plenty focused on achievement. I think many of them are too focused on achievements. I just don't think that's correct. I think there are very big, there's a big achievement gap in this country between low-income kids and high-income kids. So I think the achievement focus in low-income communities is, when we have it, is usually a good thing, and we've had too low expectations in many respects. And so I feel and often has a moral purpose. I mean, this comes up in our data too, is that teens in low-income communities are achieving because they want to, be able to support their families and give back to their communities and resist racist influences. And so a very different meaning for achievement. But by and large, I think she's created a false problem. I just don't think that's...
I think it is important to remember that it's an opinion piece, that book was her own little story. I think she can sort of stereotype certain aspects of what she sees around her as being too soft, etc. But she raised her children in an affluent. They went to a high-powered school, and those children around her, they were all they may not have been playing the piano at Carnegie Hall at age 13 like her daughter did, but they had their own sense of achievements. It's really interesting. A lot of research on Asian American parenting versus Western. One of the really interesting things actually that came up was that, which she doesn't really talk about at all, is this sense of obligation, but I think it has a lot to do with what we the three of us are thinking about, in that there was this researcher who was really interested in why Asians and Asian Americans seem to achieve better on achievement, etc. And so she's been doing a set of, I think she's done at least 17 studies on this, and she's found, for instance, in the adolescent years, parents in America sort of, and this is maybe the kind of thing Amy Chua was seeing, they let their children go, they give them more freedom. They say, oh, you're a teen now. They loosen the reins a little, generally speaking, of course. And what she found was that in Chinese families, China is there's so many different race and class differences, but in the countries where children were generally more successful, the parents gave the children, instead of letting them go at that age, they actually gave them more of a sense of obligation. Like, it's not a weighty sort of guilt-inducing thing. It's just like, you are a member of this family. One of the things we expect of you is that you do well in school. We want you. They had expectations, and they were very clear about them. And the children did achieve more. What's also interesting is she found that in Western, like white middle-class families in America, where they had the same sort of mindset, the children also achieved better. So this is kind of not really completely answering that question, but I always caution people when they bring her up to remember that she meant it as a personal story. I mean, it was first and foremost just a story. It's about her own particular situation, and it always And it also, actually, frankly, it really plays into the American fear of China. I think it came out at a time when everyone was very anxious, came out right after American 15-year-olds did so badly on this, on the PISA, and the Shanghai students were like #1, and it just came at a cultural moment that really hit a lot of nerves. But I actually wrote an article last year called "The Milestones That Matter Most," and it was about how much pressure I felt in this country for my children to be reading early, to be speaking early, etc. Whereas in the country that I had raised them in, and in other countries where I spoke to parents, the expectation was, the first thing they should learn is to be really good to the people around them, to be caring, they should be taking care of their little sister. Here, I got more the impression if I'm asking my daughter to care for her little sister, it's going to impede her individual potential. I mean, that was the message that I got, not from everyone, but from some. Like, the idea of sibling caretaking is social workers sometimes consider that very worrisome because they see so many children who are burdened by that. But there's a balance that we can achieve for our children. We can expect them to be kind to their siblings, or at least help take care of them, because that caring behavior can help them to become good people. It's an opportunity for them. We can show them, constantly give them a message that we expect them to be kind. I praise my children's kindness more than anything else, because, and I'm not saying I'm succeeding or failing or anything, it's just, it is one of the most important things to me. And I really want them to get that message very clearly, especially because I feel that they get a lot of messages that go against that.
I can attest to the fact you are succeeding.
No, no.
Yes.
I'm a storyteller by trade, and I go into the high schools. There's a group called Mass Mouth, and they teach the high school juniors how to tell their own personal story. And the thing that's so startling to us is, in the 5 years of doing this, suddenly the kids, they didn't realize that somebody had come from Bosnia and their grandmother was killed in the war, or that one woman came from Haiti in the earthquake, or one woman when she was 9 had a dog attack her. And it's like they tell different things out of their lives, and they suddenly build that connection with each other. Are there any stories that come to mind that you use that illustrate what's going on and how you want to raise kids?
Well, let me see. Tell me if this is answering your question, but I think this is a great question. So I think we have this sort of mistake about empathy and kindness. Like, we talk about empathy as like a muscle that you want to develop, or a tank that you want to fill, as if kids have a lot of empathy or little empathy. But the real issue is usually, who do they have empathy for? I mean, almost everybody has empathy for somebody. You have empathy for your best friend or your family, but you don't have empathy for people. Boys can have empathy for boys, but not for girls. People with privilege can have empathy for people with privilege, but not for people who are not of privilege. So the real goal is in expanding kids' circle of concern. Who's in your circle of concern and who's outside it? And your example seems like a great one, if I'm understanding correctly, of how you might expand kids' circle of concern, is by giving them opportunities to really hear the stories of people that are not in their immediate sphere in this way.
Yeah, so they had 30 kids in a classroom, they all listened to each other. And
they all listened to each other. I don't know if you saw the New York Times Magazine piece a few weeks ago. It was about, I may not be pronouncing the names of these schools correctly, the Fieldston School in New York, which is an ethical culture school, and how they have an exchange with another school, which is Fieldston's private, which is a low-income public school, and it's just kids telling each other stories. And I think done the right way, it's very powerful.
It's interesting you bring it up, because there are all these storytelling communities growing up, even for adults. I don't know if you listen to The Moth on the radio, but there are more and more, and I, as part of the research for my book, I've gone out to Oregon and sat in on one called The Hearth, where people in the community come together, and it's basically like The Moth, a little bit more soul. I mean, these people really know each other. They're going to see each other in the checkout line, and they're telling these stories that nobody knew about them before in a very vulnerable way. And I had many people there tell me, this is my religion. This is what I do now. Or this is my community. They have a community service aspect or a component of it. And I think there's a real desire for story.
It is sort of
it's healing.
hardwired in us to not be, to care more about those around us, obviously, than somebody far away. And research shows, like, if you put a face on the person far away, which it sounds like these stories are doing, far away meaning literally far away or just far from your world of experience, when you put a face on that, your investment in that person, your caring about that person goes up. And I think this is a really interesting, and it provides a ritual to do it, so that you can step into that ritual space and you're telling it, and it kind of allows you to drop those walls momentarily that separate us from one another, but and then has a lasting effect. It sounds like it's really interesting.
I would just offer, just one, I think is a wonderful thing to do, but the one caution about it is I do find, and I find this, there are people who are studying the teaching of the humanities, and sometimes if you have a racist point of view and you hear the story of somebody who's African American, it can reinforce it. I mean, it gives you a lens by which you are understanding a story. And so there's a way in which you can hear other people's stories, and it can reinforce the stereotypes that you have, if that's what you're looking for in a sense.
Right.
And there's something like about the Fieldston School where they've created a culture around the storytelling where they are getting kids to surface their stereotypes. It's part of a larger sort of undertaking. It's not just kind of throwing at kids out there to find each other's stories. It's shaping the conversation, shaping the listening in a certain way.
That's interesting.
There was, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was Newsweek, someone did a piece on making the comment that parents aren't allowing their children to fail. And I reflected, like, probably the majority of my moral characters, because I can remember very clearly my parents letting me fail, or I failed, and I'm like, yep, that's life, kid. And I was talking about that with a friend of mine the other day. Is that still a current thing that's happening in your experience? Are we moving away from that? Are we getting better? Have we acknowledged it? Or was it just a fleeting little thing that I thought was great and I clung to?
I don't think it was fleeting.
That was the Paul Tough article or book about resilience.
Okay.
What I find interesting about it is it got people's attention because he was showing how that leads to success.
Right.
So in a
That's
way, it's
still
like,
the,
if we can harness this to get our kids into college, then we'll do it. So it's a little bit annoying in that way. But I still see that all the
I
time.
see it in behavior, but I definitely see more awareness of it as an issue in general. But it's like lip service. Oh, it's good to let your child fail. But how much are really people are going to do that if they feel like the stakes are really high still? And so I think, if your child is the only one without the tutor that everyone else has, and you're like totally petrified, that means they won't get into such and such college, and that's the culture you live in, then maybe. But I think I see more parents who are letting their children fail at little things when they're young.
Even like losing a game or that sort of stuff.
Social issues or.
Yeah, I would just say about this. One of the things I find fascinating about it is that, like the Paul Tough book, Bill Damon wrote a similar book, 40 years ago, or 30 or 40 years ago. This is one of these things. It's like a mantra in American life. If you look at college graduation speeches, this theme is the most popular theme over the last 30 years or something. I mean, it's like something that we're always telling each other, that people have to be able to fail, but we don't seem to ever really change or really embrace in some way. And the irony is, and this was Christine's point, I think it was your point too, is that the irony is that all this attention to kids not failing not only is can make them less hardworking and ethical, it can make them less happy, it can deprive them of coping strategies that are very important for their long-term happiness and well-being. So, I think it's the messages out there. The complex thing is figuring out why people aren't.
Yeah, why don't everyone's like, I let my kid fail. I see friends of mine, I'm like, no, you don't.
I mean, I love Christine. I've talked about this since my book came out. All over the country, no one has disagreed with me.
Right. This is
no
true.
one. Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the larger society, what's too big to fail? I mean, Wall Street, failed, and everyone who failed, left with gigantic bags of money. I mean, how do you bring up ethical children when the society is completely unethical? I mean, you let children fail, and the justice system hammers them into the dirt, and they're destroyed. I mean, it's.
Well, I think there's some different things going on. So one of the things I was going to say about failure, which I forgot to say, is that, again, there's big race, class, culture differences in this. I mean, there just simply isn't the allergy to failure in low-income communities that there is in affluent communities. And well documented. Many, Christine, I'm sure you know much more about this than I do. Many immigrant communities, there's also many communities of color that just isn't the same allergy to failure that there is in other communities. So I think there are big differences in these things. I think a lot of affluent kids do terrible things and get away with it, actually. Where low-income kids would not do those things and get away with it. I think that was...
Well, they get away with nothing. I mean, they do nothing and they get hammered by the justice system. You know.
So, you know, I think the other point you were raising, which is that we live in a culture that is ethically bankrupt.
Yes.
We may have to come back next time for that.
Yeah. That's, I mean, it's a big one, right? It is,
Well,
and I think it's totally relevant. It's totally relevant.
We can't depend on our children to fix that. We, the adults, need to fix that.
I think the adults do have to fix it, but as a child-raising matter, I think we also have to raise ethical kids. I don't think they're incompatible. I agree with you.
And we do that by fixing the larger society.
We can do both, and we should do both.
We should do both. And the other point that I was making earlier about the gap is I'm just totally agreeing with you. Is there is a gap between what adults are espousing and what they're actually doing.
Yes.
So this is very much about closing that gap.
I would like to take a moment to thank our wonderful panelists. Thank you all so much. My name is Vanessa, and I'm the director of our Learning Lab here, which is our secular Sunday school, where we talk about these issues all the time. And so it's an honor for me to just come up here, and I'm going to be facilitating our moment of connection today, which very much in line with our last question, given what we talked about and the quote that I wrote down is that cultivating relationships with other people creates a moral center. And so I thought for our moment connection today, we could just take a couple of minutes, turn to someone near you who you don't know, and really just ask them how they're doing and practice your active listening and your empathetic listening and recognizing one another and asking how we are. And then we'll come back together for announcements. So take a couple minutes and then I'll rudely interrupt you.
How are you doing?
Can't you tell that I've been down for a while? I've been so damn fancy. But girl, every time that you smile, you knock down the walls I've only put dents in. I'll call the operator. She'll tell me it's now or later, 'cause time just don't matter when I'm